That has not been agreed upon yet, but that was our last proposal. All right, we're going to move on. So on this next slide, what we have is each site and their budget. So we'll start with El Primero High School, and you'll see that it's 23-24 compared to 24-25. We start with the enrollment. So last year, 23-24, the year we're currently in, it's 462 versus budgeted enrollment right now at 510. Our current enrollment that we show is about 518, and we've adjusted this since our very, very first iteration, which was the very first projection was at 480, so we've increased that. You can see that full-time equivalency has gone from 52.9 to 55.9. One of the reasons is the increased number of students would cause an increase in teachers and then some redistribution with that. Important in the revenue across all columns is that you'll see state revenue rises or falls according to enrollment. And under federal revenue, you'll see there's a decrease across all federal revenue. And what that decrease is showing the decrease of one-time funds, right? So one-time funds, especially with the feds, ESSER and whatnot, really ran out the end of this year and were expended this year. So you can see a total revenue for EPHS is at 8.9 million. The personnel is the salaries for staff, for all staff, non-SBU and SBU members. And other operating costs is a host of line items, including janitorial, food, subs, special ed, and really a large gamut of operating costs that it costs just to run the school. And depreciation is always fixed into budgets because you have to show the depreciation on the net assets. So you can see the delta or the change from the revenue to the expenses. We are showing a deficit still of 1.136 million for El Primero High School. If we look at Alum Rock Middle School, again, the enrollment was 257. We are budgeting at 227. I think the current enrollment for Alum Rock last time I looked was 218. We know that there historically is an increase in enrollment at Alum Rock Middle School over the summer. And so we're holding at that 227 when we think about the budget. You can see the difference in the FTE, and that runs the same route if you go down those lines. So that is a delta from the revenue to the expenses of 1.5 million. Going down to ECMS, again, historical or last year's data, 241. We are budgeting right now at 222 students. That was, we increased it by, I think we were budgeting at 2. Yeah, so the risk of budgeting in a deficit, it's not where you want to be at all. And so, you know, there will be some work around, again, going back and iterating around this, looking at FTE, looking at operating costs. And, you know, you'll see, I think we talked about in January or February about this concept of reserves and fixed asset versus cash, right? And so fixed assets are things that are not liquid. So our fixed assets can be our solar panels that are at Alma. And so those aren't things that we can liquidate, but they show up on our books as an asset, but they are not cash. And so what we have to do is look at our cash flow. So when we look at our reports and we've shared them, there's a cash flow, and we want to maintain and have to maintain 45 days of cash. of operating cash. So that meant if you'd stop receiving cash, you would have 45 days to operate. And so, you know, we can't continue to run a deficit.
Pete, I for one am not seeing the questions that you're responding to.
Yeah, so they're coming
You might
directly.
want to repeat them.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yep. So the question is, could you describe the risk of budgeting in a deficit?
Thank
So
you.
I got a question about food services for students and the fact that the state and the feds pay for the food, and that is true. And so that revenue is included up top. So they should zero each other out, but then it also depends on how we are ordering food, because they only reimburse us for meals that are served to students correctly. So part of the balancing that the team does is to make sure that they're tracking the orders and adjusting, so that right now, because California is paying for anything the feds aren't paying, so that we're as close to zero in additional costs as possible. And then I also got a second question, which I think other people might want to hear. And the question is, if I'm reading the chart correctly, CO is receiving about 334,000 more from the sites this year in fee for services. Is that accurate? So, Rich, I'm probably going to need your help, because I believe there was other revenue included alongside the fees, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, fundraising is there as well. Projected fundraising.
Okay. Okay, there's a request for you to repeat how you just answered that question, Rich.
So that total you're looking at right there, the 2.1 million includes fundraising as well. And what I mean by fundraising is grants that are expected to be received in the upcoming year.
Do we have any other questions coming in?
Yes, there's a question. The next question is, how is there still such a large deficit after the Alum Rock High School closure?
So the large deficit is all linked to enrollment, right? And so we are still working on numbers, and when we closed Alum Rock High School, there's also some things that we will have to absorb through that as well. But we were working kind of on what students would move from Alum Rock High School to El Primero High School. So again, you know, we projected that we would run a deficit for the next 2 years, 2.5 years, going into our third year. But this is a larger deficit than we want. Are there any other questions?
There's a request to perhaps going forward, showing the donations as a separate line item from the site fees, the site management fees that CO charges.
Okay.
Then there's a next question. How did closing Alum Rock High School help the budget situation?
So had we not closed Alum Rock High School, the deficit would have been greater, right? We were running that at a deficit and a larger deficit because, again, high schools are more expensive than middle schools to operate. And in order to operate that efficiently, we probably would have been, $6 to $7 million in deficit.
Okay, the next question. Is this budget reflecting a larger deficit than prior years? Am I remembering correctly?
So, yes.
Well,
Go on,
it,
Ruth.
it is as it relates to the current projection, right? So, but I can't necessarily speak to the original budget. So that may
Yes.
be a question.
So when the board approved a deficit budget for 23-24, that was around 2.3 million-ish. The pressure that we're feeling from the enrollment decline is huge because, just this past P2, we have been closer to like 1141. And then prior to that, we were higher. So as we've gone along carrying a deficit and then additional deficit coming because of the decline in enrollment year over year, that's what's creating the larger deficits. I think that's the last question that's in my queue. But other co-hosts need to check too, because
Yeah.
maybe you got one directly.
Sorry. So we'll hang on for one more minute. If there are no other questions, we ask that you continue to, as you think about this, and I will make this available to you in our weekly updates, which will go out tomorrow. You can email the cabinet at dcp.org. That way, all of us will receive that information or those questions and be able to put that into consideration as we move forward.
Yeah, there's another question. If I'm understanding personnel costs correctly, this year CO personnel average salary and benefit costs were about 182K. This coming year shows as 184K. Perhaps Richard, you can address the projection method there.
So I think as Pete had mentioned, that all personnel across the org that aren't part of the bargain, the collective bargaining agreement are assumed on a 0.76 COLA increase. Also, if you, considering that a number of reductions were made, the average salary may be higher for those that were remaining than the ones, so the ones that were there may have been bringing the average down a little bit.
Yeah. And so again, in order to make sure that folks who are below average, according to the compensation and benefit study, which we are hoping to finalize in the next couple of weeks, we just decided to kind of blanket that 0.76%, but that won't be reflected in the final budget, right? What will be reflected in the final budget. So those personnel costs will change. Again, this is first iteration. And so the goal will be, again, anybody who non-SBU who is below market average will be brought up to market average. Anybody who's at or above will maintain.
Okay, and there's another question. Which areas have been identified as those who are not competitive? I think at this point, it's looking, from what we've seen so far, it's hourly personnel, but it's going to depend on where they're at. Some hourly personnel got adjustments earlier this year. Some have not been adjusted yet. And so those are kind of where it's showing that. Pete, was there something else that I missed?
That's the one that stands out the most.
Yeah.
I had a question come through. So it says, I'll just read it verbatim. If we continue to cut and cut, offer 0% raises to teachers and cause them to leave, etc., how do you predict this will impact students and enrollment? And why would they stay? I think I can answer the first part around the 0% raises. So that's actually not the correct narrative, right? Like that's not actually what's happening. So, I mean, assuming we continue with the bargaining in the way that it's going, if we stay status quo and people move up on their step and their pathway, it could range from a 3% to a 6%. So that's just with the status quo. And then, yeah, so then I can leave the rest for someone else to answer in terms of why would they stay. And then second part, enrollment is down across the country, but we are twice as impacted at DCP according to the compared percentages. Those other districts are still considering raises next year. Are you aware of this? And how do you explain this? So there's a third part, but I'll let that one go that way.
So I think we're in line with what other districts are doing. And actually it really depends on district to district. So we can look more holistically at those, but you can look at some districts like Campbell Union, who currently has a 0% increase on the table. And then anywhere all up and down the board. You're right, this is a national issue. I still have friends in Atlanta Public Schools who are closing schools because enrollment is decreasing in urban populations. And so, right now, this is our best effort. We do believe in putting our staff first, and we showed that in the last 2 years, where there's again been an 18 to 20% salary increase over the last 2 years, which is fairly significant. This year, with our proposal to SBU, it's going to be, as Jordan said, anywhere from 3 to 6% salary increase. And we hope to look and bargain with the union as we look to the 25-26 school year. So.
Okay, and there's another question in that one, and then there's another one that came through that's kind of related. So I'll read the first one first. Where do you see room in the budget to attract and retain the teachers our students deserve?
So I think it's clear in the proposal. Again, we're not proposing a 0% increase in salary. We are proposing a 3 to 6% increase in salary, which I believe is competitive with the districts in our market. So.
And then that kind of addresses the next question that came through. It says teachers are not at market average. How is this going to be addressed? And it says we barely became competitive. Santa Clara, Eastside Union, Berryessa, Piedmont, and Evergreen all pay more.
So when we looked, and we're still finalizing this, but when we looked at compensation for teachers in the market and a more holistic look within the market, our teachers fell at average or above average in most areas. And so I think it kind of depends on what data you're looking at. And that's why we took agility to take kind of the third-party approach where they don't have, they're just looking at the market in its entirety rather than kind of looking at certain districts for what they're doing, because there's all sorts of things happening within districts right now.
And we're including charter schools in that study. And the reason we're doing that is we all don't have the same revenue base, right? So districts have the ability to pass a parcel tax and get more money to use for compensation. They also get separate facility funding and separate transportation funding. All of those things have to come out from our LCFF dollars, which is the same base that that districts get, but they get additional funding. So rarely can we compete toe-to-toe with districts.
And I think that kind of addresses two comments that came through. One was saying that on top of moving across steps, most county districts are offering salary increases. And then another comment around, and when we look at average, that individual teachers, when they go out, they can find other districts where they could be paid significantly more. But that might be addressed by what you just said, Ruth, around different pay structures within districts or funding model, sorry.
Are those all the questions, Jordan, for you? I have three
Yes,
more.
I don't have any more for me.
Okay.
Stop sending me more.
Well, they're all for all of us, but here you go. So this one is there a long-term plan or vision for repairing DCP's financial and reputational integrity? Will the organizational culture change to prevent crises like this in the future? Has CO engaged in any reflection or post-mortem analysis?
We have done that every single day. And what we are doing constantly is monitoring enrollment, monitoring budgets, and we cannot, as I shared earlier, continue a deficit budget. And so as we work on projections, our goal, and as we've worked on those, is to be out of a deficit spending within the next 2 to 3 years. And so we have to eliminate the deficit as much as possible and as much as we can do without cutting program. But again, it's just constantly looking at where we are and having these conversations and keeping you informed as we're doing. But reflection happens every single day.
Okay. I think what I'd add to that is that, one of the some of the conversations we are having are around how we change the narrative in the community, especially around the experiences that have led to our families choosing something different if they didn't move away, if they went to other districts, for example. So we've been talking about how do we best show our communities around us the value add that we're bringing to their students that's different from their experience, whether in district schools or other charters. So that is work we're continuing to do, and it is work that we want to make sure we are all engaged in. in whatever way we interact with our students, and then also in our recruitment efforts. And then, you know, with regard to the financial piece, part of the hard decisions we're making right now are around that, right? Getting ourselves to financial sustainability so that there is a DCP at the end of the day. And that has meant making decisions that are honestly painful. And we're going through that as we go through the enrollment process and as we continue to look at expenses as well, because there are two ways for us to get to financial sustainability. We need to increase our revenue in some way, and as well as manage our expenses really tightly.
And I think just to add to that, so this is the first iteration, and I don't want to speak for Z, but for myself, I haven't, these are very preliminary in terms of site controlled operating expenses. Like my next step is going to go through and really fine tune our budgets, and really see what are some of the things where can we tighten up on our site controlled budgets. But so I haven't had time to do that work yet.
Okay, the next question is asking about the numbers that we were talking about with regard to districts. So there are two questions that are similar. Can we see those figures, please, from district? And can we see the figures or sources that are being cited?
Yeah, as soon as the report is finalized, we will share that with the organization.
Okay, and then there's a clarification that we have said we are all about average to every place, but that we are clarifying that we are average to other similar charters. So other similar charters and districts, some of the districts that have the same, that are serving the same population as we are. Then one more question. What other kinds of measures, in addition to increasing enrollment, might be taken to reduce the deficit in the future?
Yep. So some of the conversations that we are having and we've had with bondholders is about rethinking our bond and our bond payments, because, you know, again, we have a $35 million bond that gets paid. And so that's a huge operating or huge expense. And so continuing those conversations with the bondholders is another way of doing that, making sure that we are maximizing grants within the years. So we are constantly going through and ensuring that grants that are closing out this year or next year, September of next year, that we make sure that those monies are spent. And it is a gargantuan lift because everything has to be coded, right? And everything has to be coded to the LCAP or a grant. And it's constantly moving. You know, that's why we have Rich and Charter Impact, is because, you know, financing or finance is there's a lot of detail work to it. And so one of the other things that we're doing is working on how we look at grants. The other thing is, you know, again, as I shared with you in August, thinking about going from a centralized leadership to a decentralized. So the central office staff has been cut by 10. We continue to think about ways that we push in those services to the schools, and even to the point of thinking about how we further reduce central office operating costs from, we have a central office, and do we need that going forward? And so what are cost savings that we can make in that arena? So it is constant, right? You know, the financial health of the organization outside the academic health and the health of the community is going to be what keeps the organization going.
I have one other question. Are we making investments for recruitment and grant teams How many people in our org are dedicated to that work officially?
Yeah, officially, we have one person designated to grant work because it's expensive work, right? So if we hired a development team, which most nonprofits have, a development team would be an additional, I'd say $420,000 cost to the organization. And we don't have that. We don't have that ability. And so what we are working on is maintaining the relationships with our current funders that we have, and working through that, as well as, that we just received the Valley Medical Center grant that Eileen worked on with Ethan, who's no longer with us. But it's everybody within the organization for the director's piece is tapping into grants where available and becoming grant writers, or at least initiating the grant and then us farming it out to help write the grant. But development, fundraising development is a huge cost to an organization.
So are we through all of your questions, Ruth? Because several have come in to me.
Wait, is it in the works how these tasks, this is the last one and it's an addition to that last one. Is it in the works how these tasks are being delegated and tracked to team members? That is going to be part of a conversation that Cabinet is having, because, it depends on the grant that we're going after and how difficult it is to comply with. So there are organizations that partner. For example, we are trying to apply for a grant to help underwrite the work of reviewing and updating the HVAC systems at Alma and Alum Rock Middle. And as part of that grant, there are vendors that will partner with you that have been approved by the state. They do the application. So they do the heavy lifting of getting all the stuff. All we have to do is feed them the information and they apply. So we're trying to find these low-hanging fruits first, so that, because we know that there's been a lot of change, and so work streams need to be rethought and reworked. And so we'll keep you posted with regards to how this develops. And that's the last question, Kathy. Go for it.
Okay, I have received questions from 3 individuals that all are, the questions are posed slightly differently, but they all fundamentally ask the same thing, which is that, we're in a position now when we're developing an annual budget to be looking at short-term impacts of the decisions that we're making, but the question relates to how do we balance between the short-term pressures that arise from our financial situation versus the long-term objectives and mission of the organization.
I think that's when we put this budget together, when we start budgeting or start looking at numbers or where we are with revenue or expenses, is the viability of a program, right? That was the catalyst for reducing the grades we served at Alum Rock, was that the viability of the high school program at Alum Rock High School was no longer, for those students, we were no longer doing a service to those students because of the expense that we were incurring and the deficit that was driving. So, those measures or those that work is constant.
Okay, and then there are two comments. I would say they're more of a statement than a question. One has to do with benefits, and the submitter noted that This person does not feel that the benefits are on par with districts overall. And another statement that was made relates to I'm sorry, some cuts that have been made are tough in terms of the impacts on the students and the parents. Particularly in terms of, I believe it says NDL, team cuts.
Yep.
Because it results in new case managers or a frequent change in case managers, which is very difficult for the families. So do you want to comment on those comments?
So I'm not sure what NDL comments or what NDL cuts we've made around special education. I don't believe that special education has been touched this year. Again, if we think about the three priorities, which was academics, wraparound services, and NDL or special education support. So that was, I'm not sure what that perception is. And then Kathy, can you repeat the first statement? Oh, about benefits.
Benefits not being on par with districts, right?
Right. And benefits are something that every organization, it's a continued cost that increases. And especially medical benefits, it depends on usage. It depends on a lot of things. And Ruth would be better at explaining that. We go out to market every year and try and work with our providers. And I know that Marissa will be sending out a task force to look at benefits to see kind of the benefit packages, but benefits are costly, right? And I think we do what we can within the budget that we have.
Okay, there's another question that comes in that's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's where has the insight been in the last couple of years that could have given us a better plan than the current one, which translates to me like what we could we have done anything differently to avoid being in this situation now? Let me take a crack at that as the board treasurer, and then Pete, I'll have you follow up. So one of the things that I want everybody to internalize about this is the decline in revenues. And the decline in revenues is coming from two factors. One is obviously the decline in enrollment. The other is the decline in funding as a result of cutbacks at both the federal and the state level. Could we have anticipated that? Yes, because we knew that a lot of the funding that was added over the last several years was related to COVID and the need for changing up our operations and providing different services. And we knew that it was temporary, but to not have used that COVID funding to provide the services would not have been in keeping with our mission. So yes, we have been aware that this situation was going to arise and that it was something that we would have to grapple with. We did not project the kind of fall off in enrollment that would compound that decline in the temporary funding and create a larger deficit of the magnitude that we're talking about now. We did not anticipate the degree of that. Had we projected that, I'm not sure we would have been able to bring ourselves to convince ourselves that we should be taking action based on that kind of a negative projection. But I would say that as I have tracked through the budgeting process with DCP over a period of 10 years now, I think every year there's been an exercise of going through as carefully as we can our current understanding of what the market environment looks like, what the funding environment looks like, both currently and in the future, and where we can balance both short-term and long-term considerations in a manner that reinforces the financial viability of the organization while also delivering on our mission promise. That's always been fundamental to the conversations that I've been part of. So Pete, I'll step aside and let you add to that.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that, because I think you spoke about both current and past predictors of where we are within our insight into our finances and the depth in which.
Let me check and see if anything else has come in.
And I will just remind, we're coming up on time. It is 4:58, so this is the 2-minute warning.
No, there's nothing new. No new topics.
All right, well, thank you for,
Sorry, Pete.
Yep.
I'm not really sure if it's, I'm wondering if there was maybe a comment that could be clarified or something. I think that there was, and I'm not really sure, I'm sorry, which comment statement was it necessarily referring to? But I think there was maybe a comment around Alum Rock High School's programming. Maybe it came across as not being student-centered, so I don't know if you can recall what you maybe said and try to restate. I'm not quite sure. Sorry, I'm just getting an extra chat, so I know we're at our time.
I think what he said was that we were not able to offer the programming the student deserves, but I think it's a forward-looking that in order to be able to provide students continuously the A through G courses and the enrichment type of experiences, that we would need a higher enrollment number. It was not a reflection, and I'm not trying to speak for you, but
yeah, no, that is not
my
reflection.
understanding of this when it's come up before is that it's not about what has been provided so far, right? No one can doubt the impact that Alum Rock High School staff has had on our community. We hear it all the time, heard it a lot through the graduation. So it has students who are petitioning for us not to close the school. So I don't think that anyone is saying that we haven't provided the programming or that the Alum Rock High School staff has not provided the programming. They have done a very outstanding job given where we've been with enrollment.
Yeah, absolutely. That was not to say that, it was to say to sustain the great things that are going on at Alum Rock High School. As I shared with you when we met in January, the amount of staff, the quality staff that bring it to the students every single day, we would have to cut. And so therefore would not be able to provide the quality experience that they are having and that we see day to day. And so it's about our being able to sustain that, and not about a statement about quality of program as it exists today. So I thank you for attending. And if you do have any questions further, please email cabinet@dcp.org, and I will, you'll get an email update, weekly email update with this as an attachment. Thank you.
Thank you.